In September of 2022, my family of 6 visited the Creation Museum and the Ark Encounter for the very first time. Since Rev Reads was influential in us making the trip, and also some of the things we had an opportunity to see, I thought it would only be appropriate to share a review of our time at those attractions by Answers in Genesis on the channel. And our trip was unique, you might say, so I thought you might want to hear about it. I'll start this video with my 5 pieces of advice for anyone who's going to be visiting the Ark and the Creation Museum. First, buy the refillable cup for $20, especially if you're going to be staying for more than one day. Make this the first purchase you make at the Creation Museum or the Ark. It is a steal. There are stations to fill up the cup at each level of the Ark as you climb up, and you'll get your money's worth, and my family all loves the souvenir cup that we brought home with us. Second, bring quarters for the animal feeding at the Creation Museum. The Creation Museum has a petting zoo area, and those are all exponentially more fun when you can feed the animals. Third, go to the Creation Museum and then the Ark. While I loved both, the Ark has a wow factor that the Creation Museum doesn't. So I would visit the Creation Museum first and then the Ark second. Fourth, make sure that you catch the Planetarium Show at the Creation Museum. I'll mention it again in my review, but it was my favorite part of the Creation Museum, and there is a small additional charge on top of your admission price to get into the Creation Museum, but I would say don't miss the Planetarium Show. Finally, don't buy your admission tickets to the Ark Encounter on the day that you visit the Ark Encounter. Have them in hand before you arrive that day. You really want to try to be in one of the first 5, maybe first 10 buses on to the Ark so that you can beat the first crowds that'll come in behind you. And if you don't have your tickets on hand when you show up, you will not get to be on one of those first buses. If you enjoy this review of the Creation Museum and the Ark Encounter, I would encourage you to subscribe to the Rev Reads YouTube channel in order to discover hundreds of reviews of Christian books from the perspective of a pastor. First, our trip happened thanks to a book review I did for a book written by Tim Chafee. Tim is the content manager for the Ark Encounter, and when he encouraged me to visit the Ark in person so he could give me a little tour himself, I had been chomping at the bit to head north and see the Ark Encounter as soon as I could with the guy who was responsible for some of the behind-the-scenes magic. On the morning of our tour to the Creation Museum, I sent Tim a text message and told him our arrival time at the museum. And he responded with an offer to visit the design studio for the Creation Museum and the Ark. And I was like, oh yeah, I am taking you up on that offer. So we drove over to the design studio to see what his team was dreaming up for the future of the Creation Museum and the Ark Encounter. Now, I'm not positive what I can share about that tour in this video. I don't think we saw any in-house secrets, but I also don't want to go into any details because I wasn't taking notes as we were walking around, and so I'm not positive how accurate my information can be. But I do want to share that we saw the final touches of what is going on into the expanded pro-life exhibit, Fearfully and Wonderfully Made, and it looks amazing. They are doing such good work at the design studio. Once I saw the original Fearfully and Wonderfully Made exhibit at the Creation Museum, all I can say is that it is clear the design team is working to make each project they do better than the last. They want to continually improve their products to improve your experience, which is an exciting thing to think about. So many people are rightly blown away by the Ark. I was kind of overwhelmed by the size of the Ark when I went into it. But after meeting the design team and seeing them at work, I am confident that what comes in the future at the Ark Encounter and the Creation Museum will be even better than what is currently there. My family can't wait until they add to the Ark Encounter with the Babel exhibit and then their Jerusalem exhibit. They were doing early design work on Jerusalem in the time of Christ while we were there, on top of their work on Fearfully and Wonderfully Made. And before we left, I turned to my wife at one point and said, "We are coming back as soon as Jerusalem is done." And we had not even visited the Ark Encounter yet. So my trip to the design studio was great. The behind-the-scenes people at Answers in Genesis deserve a lot more recognition than I expect they receive. Ken Ham has a great team assembled there. And having seen what is on display now, plus some hints of what is coming in the future, I know our 2022 trip to the Ark and the Creation Museum will not be our last. Then we went over to the Creation Museum. I really loved it. I was afraid that it might appear dated and neglected because of everything that had gone into the Ark. That was not the case at all. My biggest takeaway from the Creation Museum is that Answers in Genesis takes the Bible seriously. As someone who preaches the Bible, reads it constantly, studies it, I enjoy nothing more than well-made presentations of the Word of God by people who take the Scriptures seriously. And the Creation Museum clearly loves the entire Bible, and they want you to love the Bible as well. My favorite part of the museum, and it may have been this way for my entire family, was the Planetarium video. We watched Created Cosmos, and it was mind-blowing to see how they illustrated the size of the universe and how the expanse of our universe points to a world that was planned, designed, and took place in the timing presented in the Bible. Don't miss that show. As parents who have used AIG materials for homeschool and church, we also appreciated the exhibit on the 7 Seas. It was great to see it brought to life in such a professional way. We found the Creation Museum to be a delight, and can't wait for them to fill out the animal section in the future. Then it was on to the Ark Encounter in day 2. I think the highlight for me was when I first caught a glimpse of the Ark from a distance. The size of this thing is just enormous. And then when you see it, your mind starts going with 1,000 questions. You're thinking, man, I wondered before how Noah held all of the animals together in the ark along with food and supplies, and now I can see how he did it. And it's just incredible to think that God had Noah build such an amazing spectacle, you could say, and people still didn't believe that the flood was coming. Everything in Genesis 6 is totally plausible once you see the size of the ark as it is presented in the Bible. It's just astounding. And then you walk inside the ark, and the care and the craftsmanship was excellent throughout, from the animal noises to the music soundtrack to the displays themselves. My whole family was just walking around going, wow, wow, wow. It was really good. My only complaint was that I wish 1 in 4, maybe even just 1 in 10 animals were animatronics that moved ever so slightly. If a few of the animals were animatronics, it would have made the whole thing come alive even more. Oh, and speaking of the animals, to look at the designs that they had for the animals that would have possibly been on the Ark, and to read why they portrayed them as they did on the exhibit panels, it was really good. So we loved the Ark, but then we encountered the second part of our trip that was unique. My son Isaac ended up being sick that day. He woke up that morning complaining that his neck was sore, and so we thought maybe he slept weird at the hotel. And as we got into the Ark, he went from complaining about his neck being sore to all of a sudden talking about his stomach and his back and feeling cold and clammy, and we realized it's not a sore neck from sleeping weird. My son is sick. After walking to the Ark and looking at 2 stories of exhibits on the Ark, he was done. So I missed floor number 3, which is a shame because according to my family, the best exhibits were on the 3rd floor. There's one on the Bible that I would have loved to see. My wife talked about how the living quarters for Noah and his family were incredible, and then an exhibit on the different flood narratives in the history of the world. All were excellent in the opinion of my wife and other 3 kids. Now I gotta say, I'm not totally heartbroken for missing them because 1, I'm more concerned with my son Isaac than any display that's going to be out there, but 2nd, I am totally convinced we're going back. After we left the Ark, we grabbed a quick lunch at the buffet place outside of Zara's buffet. We were planning on eating in the buffet, but of course, when we realized Isaac was sick halfway through the Ark, we weren't going to take him into an indoor buffet, but that barbecue place, grabbing food from there was excellent. If you're a family on a budget and you feel like you can't afford the price of the buffet for your entire family, the barbecue place is great. It is really, really good. My other three kids also had some animal experiences that they did. They touched some kangaroos, which looked awesome, rode some camels, and I was thrilled they had that opportunity and a little jealous, wishing that there were camel rides for adults too. They had a porcupine talk from one of the caretakers and rode the brand new carousel, which received positive reviews all around from my family. Now, while they were doing the animal stuff, I started to take Isaac outside of the park with the plan that my wife and kids would follow me right behind and miss some of the things that they wanted to do. Well, as I walked into the Answers building on our way out, we were greeted by a security guard. She was really nice, asking how we were doing, and I just responded to her like I would to any friend who was being really nice to me, and I said, "We're not doing very good. My son's sick." Which led to a series of events I never requested, but gave my other kids the opportunity to view the animals, ride the camels, and go on the carousel. The security guard saw my son's obvious discomfort, heard me say that he was sick, and then immediately offered to call an EMT to look at him. And since he was feeling cold and clammy, I was ready to take advantage of the opportunity to have his temperature taken. So I was like, sure, we'll get him seen by an EMT. And an EMT named Hope came, and she looked over Isaac. She called her supervisor. He looked over Isaac as well. They took such good care of my sick guy that it felt like we were the only tourists in need in the Ark Encounter that day. They really went above and beyond. They took Isaac down to the sick bay, took his temperature, gave him some water, gave us a bottle of children's Tylenol for him to help keep the fever down, and then they even drove us from the Answers building to our minivan in one of the security trucks. In all, we had 2 EMTs and 2 security guards looking over us for a kid with a 100-degree fever and some stomach pains. This was not an end-of-the-world emergency by any stretch. I could have easily gotten Isaac onto the bus, into the parking lot, in our van, and kept hurrying my wife along with texts. But the employees at the Ark Encounter went above and beyond in their care for a sick little boy that allowed his siblings to experience parts of the Ark Encounter that they wanted to see the most while we were there. I've taken our family to Disney World 5 times. I would love to go more, but I'm guessing I may have taken my last trip to Disney World because of the direction that Disney is going. The thing I always loved the most, though, about Disney World was the staff, the cast members. The cast members always gave us these little Disney magic moments that made our trip so much better. And now I gotta say, the staff at the Ark Encounter, they are just as good based on my experience. The people designing the future displays, if any of my kids want to do design work, even get into biblical research, into the time periods of the Bible, I'm going to encourage them to do some work with Answers in Genesis. My family thoroughly enjoyed the Creation Museum and the Ark Encounter. If you've never been, you should go. The animals make it great for kids. My youngest is 8, and he did fine during the 2 days. I do think that the older you are, the better the Creation Museum and the Ark Encounter are, because the more you read of those displays, the more you enjoy the experience. And if you've already been, make plans to go. Because the one thing I can tell you, based upon my behind-the-scenes look at the design studio, is that the Creation Museum and the Ark Encounter are just going to keep getting better and better and better. And then also the quality of the employees working at the Creation Museum and at the Ark Encounter, they are kind, they are gracious, they are, I'm going to give them the highest compliment I can at this point, they are Christ-like. And they make the Creation Museum and the Ark Encounter a joy. Ken Ham may be the face of Answers in Genesis, but he brought together a team, both behind the scenes and at the exhibits, that are stars as well. So my family is going to be going back to the Creation Museum and the Ark Encounter again. And one of the reasons is that the people that work there are so wonderful and helpful, and I can't wait to experience their service again.